Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. In my previous episode of Conflict of Nations with Thailand, I became the president of Thailand and quickly built a strong coalition with my neighbors, and we expanded into China, Philippines and New Zealand. Today we are going to war with the strongest foe yet, and a very ambitious one at that. I am your host, Redgofighter. This is Conflict of Nations, and let's get into it. Before we get into the video, I have a challenge for all my viewers. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I've noticed a large part of my audience isn't subscribed to the channel, and my average viewership has been quite low lately. So if you watch this video till the halfway point, then please leave this video a like. And if you haven't already, subscribe. So that's the challenge I've got for all of you. Let's get into the video. Continuing from day 8, we're back in Southeast Asia, where our campaign turns north towards Colombo, as our forces clear up what's left of the communists. The next target, our biggest threat, Afghanistan, was with the Europeans, and he was expanding fast and aggressively. He had already crossed over the Indian border, and if he continued east, Myanmar and the rest of the Southeast Asian brothers were next. We had to stop his advance before his coalition joined him in attacking us, or in defense of him. By day 10, we had completed the invasion of China, but the people of our nation were tense. There was no cheers, there were no celebrations in the street. The people knew we would clash with Afghanistan and his European allies, and that it was gonna come at a heavy cost, whether it had resulted in victory or in defeat. Our strategy was to conquer Sri Lanka and Oman and construct airfields in these territories, then use them for logistics purposes, helping fly troops and equipment along the coast and as bases to launch airstrikes and provide air support. Vietnam, on the other hand, would launch an invasion into the eastern parts of India from Myanmar and move towards occupied Pakistan, and Indonesia would invade him from the western coast of India and along the shores of Pakistan. This would draw his forces south and east so that I could come in from the north, from China, and head straight for his homeland, and hopefully overwhelm him. During the early hours of the night, Vietnam launched his invasion into India and quickly began engaging Afghan forces. It was a swift offensive marked with easy victories as his forces reached Dhaka, Kolkata, and Patna. Things were looking good, but we all know good things don't last forever. The following day, Vietnamese forces had lost the momentum in eastern India, and things were looking bad, very bad. Ukraine came to Afghanistan's help and together with their air forces launched a large series of strikes against Vietnamese forces. He was facing heavy losses. With every Afghan soldier lost, Vietnam lost 5. Vietnam wanted Indonesia and I to begin our attacks, as he began losing the advantage. So we began dispatching our troops and navy along the coast of India and Pakistan. And in the west of China, I sent my air force to patrol the skies over Kabul, which I must admit was probably my biggest mistake. At this moment, with Ukraine now involved in the war, I was worried that this was part of a calculated play to bring the Europeans into a war with us and destroy us. So, it was time for SEP to assemble. As I contacted Australia to join in the coalition war, it was now a winner-takes-all game. But unfortunately, Myanmar declared war on me on this day, as the original Allied government there collapsed and fell victim to a coup, which saw a new and more hostile government come to power. Hey guys, it is now the halfway point of this video, and I want to take you on from that challenge I gave you at the start. So if you're still watching, please hit that likes button, and if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel, and let's grow this community. I am really committed to this channel now, and it is a dream of mine to see it grow. We have a goal to reach 100 subscribers by the beginning of February. And why not join us to see that come true? Now, let's get back into the video. By day 13, our invasion of eastern India had stalled as Vietnam was suffering heavy losses. And in the west, we created another front in Pakistan, but we were also stalled there because Ukraine stationed his forces there to support Afghanistan. My forces in the northwest of China were forced to retreat after they were attacked by the Afghan Air Force, and his forces began advancing into the northwest parts of China. I was hesitant to stop him because he had achieved aerial superiority and I couldn't tell how big his force was. With both our fronts under heavy pressure, I managed to mobilize a new weapon that could change the tide of the war in the Pakistan front. A frigate to support air defenses in the region, and so I ordered it to set sail for Karachi. Toward the end of day 13, my frigate had arrived in southern Pakistan and managed to shoot down several Ukrainian aircraft. Ukraine retaliated by bombing my airfield in Oman, and in response I pulled my frigate back to protect my airfield. But looking at this from a future point of view, I don't think that was a good move, as I don't think the airfield provided me any significant military advantage, yet alone I hadn't started using it yet. In the eastern parts of India, Vietnam and Indonesia's air forces were working overtime to attack Afghan's troops in retreat. But Afghanistan's air force was proving to be a great challenge to them, as losses mounted. The fall of Myanmar's friendly government had complicated our logistics, as we had to go around the entire country to support our forces and had increased travel times to get more troops to the front lines. The reality was beginning to sink in that we were fighting a losing battle. During the final hours of day 13, Myanmar launched an offensive into my homeland. Morale among my people collapsed and markets went into freefall as worries of an incursion and possible defeat was spreading amongst the population. This was a terrible time, as it meant I had to redeploy troops meant to fight Afghanistan to my homeland, and the possible damage or complete loss of infrastructure. By day 14, my forces were stretched. I was getting letters from my commanders across my units saying that they were overworked, constantly getting repositioned, and some being stationed to protect cities that weren't in any real danger. I had to pick whether it was to continue the fight against Afghanistan and Ukraine or fight Myanmar and protect my people. And I made my decision. After an emergency cabinet meeting in the early hours of day 14, I contacted the Afghan government and apologized for the war that I had started with my coalition and asked if we could start peace talks. At this point, Vietnam and I knew the war was over for us. Vietnam had stopped supplying his troops to the front lines and had possibly started his own negotiations with Afghanistan. By day 15, Vietnam announced he was out of the war, He had lost almost 90% of his military force. For me, talks with Afghanistan were still going on, and talks with Ukraine had also begun, but Ukraine was not in the mood for peace talks, and was still quite angry about the whole ordeal. But Afghanistan, on the other hand, was still at the negotiating table. I spent most of day 14 redeploying my forces along the Myanmar border, and began investing in anti-aircraft and surface-to-air missile batteries. Also during this time, I realized just how much my coalition had lost in this war. My army was severely understaffed to take on Myanmar. At this point, I didn't realize that Australia had gone inactive and left our coalition. We were a lot weaker than we were when we first started this journey. By day 16, things were starting to turn around. I'd mobilized my first cruiser and some helicopter gunships too. I was starting to gain traction in Myanmar, and the peace talks with Afghanistan were going well. However, the peace talks with Ukraine stalled, as he was still unhappy, and nothing could get him back to the negotiating table. And to escalate tensions even more, Turkey began invading my territory in Oman. But at this point, I didn't see the value in this territory. My focus on this day was to destroy as much of Myanmar's infrastructure and forces as I could, with my navy and my air force, before launching an offensive. During day 17, my forces began their offensive into Myanmar, starting with his southeastern coastal cities. I had a new weapon joining my military, as I mobilized an AWAC aircraft to help me scout out the enemy units and to monitor and protect my borders. I had already captured the cities of Yangon and Meik, but my strategy was to defeat Myanmar in a slow, staged and calculated manner, because at this point I was very cautious of losing valuable soldiers and equipment. This day also brought some good news in terms of the peace talks with Afghanistan, as we finally negotiated the terms to end the war. Afghanistan would take the whole of India and Bangladesh, as well as northwestern China and Tibet, but he wouldn't be allowed to enter or conquer Myanmar. Day 18. To the disappointment and relief of my people, the peace treaty with Afghanistan was signed, and the war between our nations was over. But the war with his coalition members, Turkey and Ukraine, wasn't. After Turkey took Oman, we made peace, but Ukraine never came back to the negotiating table. A conflict between our nations was all but guaranteed in the not-so-distant future, and I had to prepare for that day. No, we had to prepare for that day. As for Myanmar, my forces continued to make slow but solid progress through towards his capital, but victory was still uncertain. Well guys, this brings us to the end of today's video. If you're still watching, thank you, and you are a real soldier in this army, and I really appreciate the support. I want to apologize for uploading this video a week late, but I hope it was worth it. This is one of the longer videos in the series, and I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like the video, and if you haven't yet already, please do subscribe and join our growing community. I have a lot more exciting videos lined up for this channel, so you have to subscribe if you don't want to miss out on any of those. But that's it from me. I am your host, Redgofighter. Thank you for watching and see you all next time.